Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of On the Pod, the Football Experience. Tonight, just me and Nev talking our way through the weekend's fixtures and what's about to happen in the Champions League. So, Nev, how are you, mate?
Pretty good, man. It was a bit of an exciting weekend. Some good results, some bad results, but overall, yeah, pretty good.
Well, I mean, it wasn't an exciting weekend. For the most part, it wasn't very exciting up until that last game at the Etihad to really round off the weekend. And I'm sure, as anyone in the footballing world would have, I'm sure you've watched the game. So let's start. I just want to hear your thoughts on how the game went, the game's patterns, just what you thought while you were watching it.
So to put it in the most simplest terms, I think over the entire 90 minutes, I think it's very easy to say that Liverpool were actually lucky to get a result out of that. That's my opinion as a neutral. Especially over the first 45 minutes. It felt like Man City absolutely played Liverpool off the park. Like in terms of their passing, their pressing, the only thing that was missing from their game was their finishing. Like that should have been a three. I'll give you guys the one goal, so there should have been like a 3-1 or a 4-1 first half. That game should have been dead and buried based on the first half performance. In the second half, though, you guys started very well. You guys did come alive a little bit and started to take the game to City, but then after about the first 15 minutes, they started to put their foot on the game a little bit more and get a little bit more control. It wasn't as dominant as the first half, but they were still overall the better team over both halves, I felt. Now, having said all that, I think it's just a testament to how good of a team Liverpool is, considering that they can play, and I think you'll agree with me that they played poorly. That you can play poorly and you can still manage to get a goal or two and get a result. That's what all great teams do. In those, whether it's a big match or a small match against a mid-table or a bottom of the table opponent, you can have an off day, and you can still manage to grind out a win or even a draw against a top team. And had City have been more clinical, had they had signed a Harry Kane or another number 9 that's going to score 20 or 30 goals a season, that game would have been dead and buried. That's the way that I saw it. I don't know if you saw it any differently or if you have some agreement there or in total agreement. So I'll give it back to you just to see what you felt about it, considering that you're a Liverpool fan.
Well, the way you wrapped it up at the end, I thought brought it back to a point where I agreed with pretty much everything you said and how you saw the game. Because on another day, and this is an interesting point, I might get back to this one later, but on another day, it could have been, as you say, 3 or 4-1 in the first half to City, without a doubt. But as you were saying that, the whole time I was thinking, but this has been our problem with City all season. They can play you off the park because they pack their team with the midfielders, the technical players who can do that. But then when the chances come and you've got to score the chances, they're not necessarily clinical in games where there's a finer margin. Because in games against teams who can't play at their level, then it doesn't really matter as much because they're going to get so many chances, they'll take enough, they'll win 4-5, whatever it is. But in the games where the margins are tighter against the teams who are closer to their level or at their level, then we saw it again. The first half, they didn't take their chances. I mean, I thought the Alisson save was good on Raheem Sterling, but that was a weak finish. I thought the header from Rodri that should have just been laid into Stones' path was shocking. was a sitter. That should have been a goal 100%. And again, Liverpool playing that high line to try and deal with that set piece. It's risky. And this is the point I was talking about before. It's interesting because Klopp, when talking about Atletico in the past, has said if you're going to defend in that way, where you're defending on top of your box with 9, 10 men, then you're pretty much playing the lottery every time you play. And what's interesting is, so obviously he wants to avoid that every time, but now he plays with this ridiculously high line that you play the lottery every game again, because as you've said and as I've agreed with you, that first half could have been 4-1. De Bruyne takes his chance on the swivel. Then all of a sudden, I was fearful after the first goal, actually. I was quite fearful because I'm like, if they get another one quickly, this game is nigh on impossible now. And I know Liverpool's scoring prowess and everything, so maybe it would take another goal before I thought impossible, before two might not be enough. But I was fearful. And then our one attack in the half, or one of maybe two attacks in the half, we get a goal. So that just shows you how clinical Liverpool can be when they get in the right areas. As we've mentioned before, three players, those three strikers, all in double figures in the Premier League. So that was the tale of it. So going in at 1-1 shouldn't have been, 2-1 down, sorry, shouldn't have really been that surprising, because we know that City have already had these problems with taking chances, and we know Liverpool, if they do create chances, will score them. Totally agree. Second half, that was Liverpool's best spell, that first 20 minutes of the second half. And it's interesting because we're talking about the game patterns and we're talking about these blocks where teams have ascendancy. It really was like, if I were to sit down and analyze that properly and make my page of notes like I normally do, I don't think I could see too far into the tactics and the shape, because this was more of a boxing match than it was a football match. This was trading blows for blows. And the thing I noticed was, after the first 15 minutes, after what you could say was that first round, players looked gassed. They looked tired after 15 minutes. And I'm not surprised, because the intensity of the game was so much. And the other thing you've got to add on to it, and why it feels like a boxing match because of it, is the jeopardy. The jeopardy was really high. The stakes were really high, because obviously in boxing, you're getting physically hurt if you make mistakes. And in this game, it was about as close to physical hurt as you could feel in terms of the jeopardy and the stakes on the game. You couldn't make mistakes. And Liverpool looked shaky. They looked like they were, I wouldn't say buckled under it, because they went in 2-1 only down, but they were very shaky in that first half. They couldn't play the ball out. They had very little confidence. The City rattled them. So I totally agree with how you saw the game ebb and flow, and I just thought it was interesting to make that sort of comparison between that and a boxing match. So I don't know if you wanted to feed off that or talk about anything else you saw in the game.
Well, you did touch on it now towards the end. I did forget to mention that I saw a lot of uncharacteristic mistakes from your back four in that first half. Like, Van Dyke was giving the ball away, Robertson was giving the ball away, Matip was giving the ball away, and like they weren't clearing their lines. Like they were getting caught with the ball under their feet, and that actually led to a lot of chances as well. So. And like I said, it was very uncharacteristic. Like, yes, Man City have arguably the best press in the world alongside Liverpool, but to see your defense, especially in the first half, I guess, be so shaky and crumble I'm going to use the word crumble under that sort of pressure, maybe because they haven't received it from another team before. Not to that intensity, because it's been 4 or 5 months since they last played against City. Yeah, like there was that first half didn't seem like a typical Liverpool performance. They seemed rattled, and the comparison you make to a boxing match, I think that's also a fair comparison too, because in the second half, especially, it did seem that the teams were trying to go blow for blow. Obviously, there was no knockout punch, but yeah, like I can definitely see that sort of that comparison. And at the end of the day, that there was a title on the line. This was built up as being the title decider, especially if City won it. But now, yeah, we'll go into the last, what is it, seven fixtures to see who has that better run in. And both teams have shown in the past that they can win all, 8, 10, 12 games in a row that are left right till the final day. And it doesn't matter. You can't really talk about, if they drop points here, if they drop points there, because both teams have shown in the past that, yeah, they can have a 100% win record in those final matches. So it's going to be interesting how this run-in goes, considering I think everyone would agree that Liverpool do have the harder run-in on paper, because they still need to face some of those top four contenders, and also they have a derby as well, like a Merseyside derby, and I think they have one other team that's sort of like mid-table that could be a tough test. Yeah, but they're a top 14. They have Spurs. I think they have West Ham as well. Everton, Man United.
City have West Ham.
City have West Ham.
We've played West Ham twice.
Okay.
Yeah, City are the ones who have West Ham. Yeah.
Okay.
No, but we definitely have the harder running.
Yeah, on paper you have the harder running.
Yeah.
So yeah, it could be. Oh, you have Wolves, which could be a tricky tie, even though it's at Anfield.
Yeah.
But yeah, like on paper, you guys have the harder run in. So, and yeah, it could be very interesting. And I think I'll just conclude on my end saying that I think City can feel a little bit hard done by the result, whereas Liverpool, I think, based on the 90 minutes, will be more happy with that result than City.
Yeah, totally agree. At halftime, I would have sprinted back to Anfield with a point. And to be honest, if you offered me a point before the game, I might have taken it. So and just seeing how the game went out and how the chances fell, 100%. I think I'm very happy with a point out of that game. Just before I move around, like to what surrounds the game, I just wanted to touch on something, and you were talking about. I wanted to touch on something from in the game. Lastly, before we move away, and you were talking about the City press, and within that, obviously, it's a very good press, but it's quite basic in what they do. It's a 4-4-2, but they make sure that they get pressure on you with those two strikers straight away, and then the wingers will lock in when they can onto the fullback. So it's a quick press, and we know Guardiola's famed for the transition, the counter press, much like Klopp is as well, except Klopp wants to be more direct when they get the ball back from that counter press, but City in their own way do much the same things. But within that, and it's a couple of interesting positional things. And the most interesting one for me is Bernardo Silva playing as a proper central midfielder, as a number 8. And normally I don't like to use the numbers to refer to positions, but when a team plays a sort of 4-2-3-1, like City's balance sort of is, you can call them their roles in that central midfield. So obviously De Bruyne is the 10, Bernardo Silva's the 8, and Rodri's the 6. So Bernardo Silva is now an out-and-out number 8. He doesn't play wide anymore. He can sometimes play as the false 9, but I think and we've seen it because this is one of City's biggest games of the season, Guardiola likes him to play as the 8. And as far as surprising transformations, I guess it's not that surprising, but I've never seen an attacking winger turn themselves into an 8. Obviously we've seen players like John Barnes and Ryan Giggs turn themselves into our 10s, and they come in and they either play, or even a Gareth Bale who played as a second striker / number 10. So we've seen that transformation. I don't think I've seen a winger come in and play as a proper number 8, as a central midfielder who does his defensive work in shape, and who sort of plays like that. And funnily enough, the player who sort of got me thinking about this was another weird transformation from Newcastle, Joelinton, who turned from a target man into as well a number 8, which is a crazy one, and he actually looks very comfortable in there. So good on Eddie Howe on seeing that one. I love seeing players play in weird positions. It's always fascinating to see how their qualities translate into there and what the manager's seen. So, but I think with that, Bernardo Silva is excellent at that job. He's very disciplined. He knows where to be, and obviously him in the counter press is very good. So if he's got that opportunity to do that, fantastic. But what Liverpool couldn't exploit was that obviously being a strength for Man City, but it's also a weakness for Man City. Because I think if you could get players around Bernardo Silva and you could start possessing the ball in that central area of the pitch, then you can start to have more ascendancy in the game and have more of the ball and push City back. But Liverpool's midfield is not built like that. Obviously, Thiago played the out ball that sort of started the move for the goal in the first half. So I guess he sort of did his job in that aspect, but he couldn't get on the ball enough in that first half and it was weird as well because he was playing a lot on the left, so he was actually favouring the side that Rodri was covering. Maybe if he went over to the Bernardo Silva side, he might have had a bit more success on that side and maybe exploited Bernardo Silva's maybe lack of experience and defensive qualities compared to Rodri. But Liverpool's midfield can't do that. When you got Henderson playing on that side, he wants to make overlapping runs all the time. He doesn't really want to sit in those pockets and possess the ball. So I thought that really helped City get on top in the first half, and I thought the midfield battle was 100% won by City. Second half, Liverpool had more energy, and they got it back a little bit for that 20-25 minutes. And before I go into my next player, who is not a positional change yet, but who I think maybe we should be looking at changing positionally, I want to get your opinions on the next player, and that is Trent Alexander-Arnold. I just want and I know you love mentioning Martinelli tearing him off in that game at the Emirates earlier. So I just want to get your thoughts on Trent, and then I'll go into what I could see maybe his future being.
So with Trent, like what position could I see him transitioning into? Like
I just want your opinion on like how you see Trent Alexander-Arnold, because obviously the rap is great going forward, but can't defend. So I don't know if you subscribe to that or.
I think Liverpool could probably try playing with a back three. That will allow him a little bit. It will allow him the same amount of attacking exposure, but I think it will sort of safeguard him on the defensive end as well. To me, and like we could probably do this another day, like a combined City Liverpool 11, but I'll sort of give some insight into that because I was thinking about it the other day. Like, would you put De Bruyne with Trent Alexander-Arnold in the same team? And my answer to that would be no, because I think that they occupy the same spaces on that right-hand side and they provide the same delivery as well. It's just that De Bruyne plays or has more freedom to go forward, obviously, because he's a number 10. But they both occupy those sort of same spaces, so I don't think that they would necessarily work together in a same 11. So I could see Trent pushing up higher, maybe even into a right midfielder, and then putting someone else in behind him if you're going to play, if you will stick with 4 at the back. So I can see him playing that sort of De Bruyne role further up front, and then giving him less defensive responsibility. That's what I can sort of see his development.
Yeah. So I was
just before you go into
thinking about this.
Because if you want to also make a comparison, I think Gareth Bale played as a left back when he was at Southampton. He was utilised as a left back, and then he was pushed up into a left mid, and then into a sort of like left-sided number 10 or left winger as well. So he's had that same sort of transition from his early years into like his mid-20s and then late 20s and now 30s.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point because I think we're on the same path with what you talk about De Bruyne and Trent occupying similar spaces. in that, and I think De Bruyne has probably evolved past favouring that, although it's still a tool in his arsenal. But I think he plays more as an out-and-out number 10. I thought in that Liverpool game you didn't see him drifting too much to control the play, but the game was so frenetic you couldn't really do that. But obviously that's a good tool. But obviously that's one that Trent has as well, and he has that weapon of that cross from that side. But I think obviously the rap is he's great going forward, but can't defend. And you hear pretty much every pundit say it, and obviously a lot come to the conclusion that well we'll put up with what he gives us going back as long as we get what he gives us going forward. But I just think there comes a point where well isn't it the manager's job to put the player in the best position where they can succeed? And I'm not saying that there's a big problem here, but I'm saying there could be a different solution. We could look at something else because, as I touched on before, this game I felt needed players in the midfield who wanted to get on the ball and wanted to start dictating play for Liverpool and sort of expose that Bernardo Silva in as a number 8. So why when and I don't know why Klopp seems to have this reluctance, but he never wants to play Joe Gomez. Joe Gomez has been fit this whole season pretty much, and he hasn't wanted to play him. And it's funny because that 18-19 season, where we looked our best was Virgil van Dijk and Joe Gomez at the back. Joe Gomez is every bit as quick as Virgil van Dijk. He can cover that ground so quick. So he's a bit like Kyle Walker. He'll make mistakes in terms of his marking, but if he's in a sprint with you from the halfway line, he'll get back and he'll get back goal side on you. Not many get in behind him. And then when you've got Virgil van Dijk next to you, I mean, if you want to play this high line, those two players are perfect for. But even if you don't want to play him as one of the two centre backs, why can't you look at putting Joe Gomez as the right back? And then you can put Trent in that right central midfield position where Henderson wants to make those overlaps. Because A, you can have Trent doing exactly the same things as Henderson there. And then B, you could have a better ball player in there. It might take a little bit of time for him to pick up the positioning. So I think that's kind of what I'm disappointed about in terms of there have been games during the season and during any season where you could start tinkering with this where they're games that aren't against Man City, obviously, and you can start getting Trent used to playing in that position. But I've never seen him try it. And I just think it will make you more solid defensively if you want to play the high line. The only problem with Joe Gomez at right back is he always loses his shoulder, much like Trent. So if you're defending deeper, that's not what you want because if the ball's coming in from the other side, he'll loses his man quite often. He used to play right back a lot early on under Rodgers and even under Klopp, I think, early on. So that's a problem with him. But in terms of the high line, he gives you more balance defensively. He wants to do more defensive work. And so he's not going to be the one overlapping and making those wide runs. So now Trent has the ability to sort of drop into that space anyway, which he would have occupied regardless. But now if there's a turnover in possession, Joe Gomez is back there and he can solidify things. Whereas if there's a turnover in possession and Trent wants to be the wide player or Trent wants to make his underlapping run, then there's all that space back there. And then he has to sprint back in. And then if he catches up, he has to do his 1v1 defensive work in a position where he's already exhausted from sprinting back there. So while I agree that he's not the best defender, I think it's been long enough now that Klopp could have looked at doing something else. Because I think that's your job as a manager of a top side. You never sit on your laurels, and this Liverpool team could never be accused of sitting on their laurels. But you got to keep looking for ways to progress and ways to get better. And I think if there's one thing you can say about Klopp tactically, I think he could get better. I think there's adjustments in games where you don't have to change your philosophy. You can just change positioning of players. Still play the same way, but now you've got a better balance to the team. There's more solidity if you're starting to feel under the cosh or whatever. So I just think that's an interesting one because obviously I've heard pretty much for months now about the rap on Trent, and I just wanted to look at it from a different angle and maybe look at it from the Klopp perspective because that's your role as a manager, I guess.
Well, has Klopp ever played anything besides a 4-3-3? So would you say that he's
no,
then...
I haven't seen it this season.
Yeah, because
I haven't seen anything but, yeah.
because you've seen Reece James playing in the midfield five with three at the back, and I guess with Trent's defensive what's fragilities? Is that a word?
Yeah, fragility.
I need to work on my vocabulary. I think regarding his defensive fragilities, I think that also speaks testament to why he's pretty much the third choice right back for England as well. So I think if Trent, for instance, was playing under a Conte or a Tuchel or even a Pep, I think he would have. Those managers would have already explored him in a midfield five. Whereas, it's really weird. I don't think like you said, and like I asked, like I don't think I've ever seen Klopp, even at Dortmund, play anything but four at the back. So that just seems to be his system. He's never tried playing a 3-4-3 or 3-5-2 or anything like that. Like he's never tried playing a different sort of system and formation. It's always been 4-3-3. So yeah, you maybe next season, but you might not ever see Klopp play a different formation unless he listens to this podcast and has that sort of has that sort of light bulb moment.
The cachet.
Yeah, like who knows?
It's been long enough now, and I don't. If he wasn't going to tinker with the 4-3-3 last season when we'll lose his 6 on the bounce at home, he's never going to do it. I mean, so I'm not holding my breath for that, but I'm just looking at it from what I might look to do. But before we leave this, before we leave this game, at least, actually, there was one more thing I wanted to ask you. Do you think Liverpool should have finished the game with 11 men?
You're talking about the Thiago incident?
No, I wasn't going to talk about the Thiago one, actually, but if that's the one you wanted to touch on.
I'll mention that one first, and then you can mention the one that you're talking about. Because I think I might know what one you might be talking about, but it might be something different again. But with the Thiago one, it's sort of similar to the Pickford one that we talked about last week or the week before on Van Dyke, where there's already an incursion, like an offside or something that stops the play, and then there's a foul after that. So I think it was Rodri that pulled him back, but then he sort of tugged his shoulder back, but it wasn't enough to make him go to ground.
Yeah.
So Thiago still made the tackle after he was fouled, which I know it obviously didn't lead to an injury, but he still made, and it looked like a dangerous tackle as well on De Bruyne. So because the Pickford one wasn't given a red, there's obviously precedent for this one not to be given a second yellow. But since everyone is in agreement that Pickford should have seen red for the tackle on Van Dyke, I think if you want to maintain some consistency with your rationale with that, then this one should have been given a yellow, and that would have been a second yellow. So it should have been a sending off, but I can see why it wasn't given, because it was already a foul in the build-up to that. But yeah, just to maintain consistency with the Pickford Van Dyke one, I think it should have been given a second yellow, just because I think that also the Pickford one should have been given a red.
Yeah, so just a few things in that before I go on to the one I want to mention. First of all, without knowing the absolute letter of the law, but I believe if the game stopped, I believe that in terms of like a footballing play like the Pickford one or versus the Thiago one, I think you can only really give a red card for like serious foul play rather than any like foul that occurred. And that's where you and I disagree, because I don't think the Thiago one was endangering an opponent. I just thought it was what you'd see in a football pitch. His studs were pretty much on the ground. His leg came across him. So it's a foul, obviously. If the foul wasn't already given before that, it's a foul. So I don't know if that's the reason why you can't send someone off for something like that once the play has already been stopped. Whereas the Pickford one is something that is seriously endangering an opponent. So you can be sent off for that, obviously. But obviously, I'd have to go into the law books and really look into and research that one. But that's my inkling. That's what I feel happened in that one. But the one I wanted to mention was the Fabinho one. I believe it was on Bernardo Silva. And look, I'll be honest. Obviously I'm happy that Bernardo Silva's okay. But if you could have laid one on any City player, I would have picked Bernardo Silva. So just putting that out there. He winds me up a little bit sometimes. But the Fabinho one, I've been of this opinion for a while now. If you're going to commit a professional foul, you must do it with your hands. You must tug the shirt, you must rugby tackle and just hold them and make sure they don't get it. But if I was a referee, I would maybe look at doing something where I made it clear going into the match. If you professional foul someone with a sliding tackle or with your feet, then it's an instant red card because I think that's where you start to endanger opponents. If Bernardo Silva's like studs locked on the turf with that Fabinho chance, he could have been in a lot of trouble. So I think as soon as you see a professional foul that's done with the feet with like a rake of studs down the back of or down the sides, I think it's an instant red card. I know that there wasn't malice, but he was out of position. He had to make a foul, and for me, he made the foul in a dangerous way that I think you should see a red card for that. Whereas if he just tugs the shirt or wraps his arms around him, it's just a yellow card for a professional foul because you're not really endangering your opponent by doing it. You're just committing the foul. So I don't know what your take is.
Well, since I didn't mention that one, I that one doesn't like live in the memory, so I can't exactly remember that moment in the game because I must not have thought too much of it. So I can't really comment on that specific situation, but I think that you do have a point with the professional foul if it's being done by like with the sliding tackle or something like that, then yeah, it's definitely more riskier and it should be looked at as a red card situation. I think you do have a point there, because you can just as easily hold their shirt, or like hold their body or something, or like pull them back by the shoulder. So yeah, I think you have a point there, but I'd have to have another look at the incident again to really determine whether I think that it was worthy of a red card or not.
Yeah, of course. And so just the last little thing, and you might have to dig through your memory banks for this one. But on this Man City versus Liverpool, looking at the bigger picture, because we're on track for this season, and while it's not quite the 18-19 season, we're on track for probably both of these teams to reach around 90 points. So the question I wanted to ask you is, how highly would you rate the second place team in terms of the greatest teams in Premier League history that we've seen, just in the Premier League, obviously?
Well, I think the simple answer to that is, could you name the runner-up for the last? Probably you could probably do it for the last five. Obviously, the last five seasons, because it's pretty much been either Man City or Liverpool. Last year it was Man United. But for the last like 20 or 25 years, could you name the runner-up? Like off the top of your head, could you say, oh yeah, they came second? Because all right, for instance, who came second in the Leicester winning season? Can you remember that?
I believe that was Arsenal picked Tottenham because the rage was that Tottenham were finally going to finish above Arsenal at least, and then Tottenham capitulated at the end of that season, I believe.
Yeah, and like a lot of people probably would have said Tottenham, because like they were obviously in the
because they
title
were the
race
only
whole.
ones challenging for that title. Because even though Arsenal got them, they were out of the title race long before Tottenham.
Yeah, exactly. So, and a lot of people would have picked Tottenham, and a lot of people probably wouldn't even pick. Even at this point in time, they probably wouldn't have said that Man United came second last season. If you were to ask, oh, who came
If you
second?
look at if you
So,
look at it in 5 years, no way is anyone remembering that United team that's finished second in the last 5 years.
Yeah, so I think if you're looking back on it throughout like history, so like let's say in another 10 or 15 years time, you're going to see, oh, City won the title, or Liverpool won the title. Then the team that came second, you'll be like, oh yeah, they put up a decent title challenge, but ultimately they came up short, and you might not necessarily remember how great they were just because they came second. That's the danger, I guess, of any team, being runners up in any competition. So, like, we obviously look back fondly on the Arsenal Man United rivalry from the late '90s and early 2000s, but we also look back on that because the players themselves had those rivalries and that sort of hatred. But are we looking back and saying, oh, those were two of like the best teams ever and stuff like that? No, you're looking back more at the rivalry. So I'm not sure that this will necessarily hold that sort of test, if I'm being completely honest. But who knows? It could, because these teams are putting up 90 plus points every season, pretty much for the last like 3 or 4 seasons. So,
Well,
yeah, that's my thoughts.
well, that's interesting because I was probably going to leave that for the preview pod going in, but I guess we should just do the topic now. Well, I'll touch on it after, but you brought up the rivalry and how it compares to former days. But I guess, all right, yes or no question. I just want a quick answer. Would you put the runners up of this season above any of the league champions that have gone before in the Premier League?
In terms of if they had to go, 11v11 in a
Best
one-off.
team, best teams in Premier League history. Like, regardless of where they finish position, just the best teams in Premier League history. Would you put the team that finished second above any of the champions previously?
I don't think I necessarily would. Like, above some champions, probably, but like there were some fantastic sides, and it just
Yeah.
depends how. It's really hard to look back on it and say, oh, the league was more competitive back then, because the middle of the table was more competitive with the top of the table, because there wasn't so much money in the game now, where I guess it has sort of created these outliers. So that's why you were pretty much guaranteed a title if you put up 80 points. Even like 70 points, you could still win the title. So if you're gonna look just based on points tally, it's just like it's easy to say, oh yeah, like these teams are putting up 90 plus points every season. That means that they're better just because they're picking up 90 points. But I don't necessarily think that that's true, because these teams, like City have spent like over $1 billion on their squad, haven't they? And I think Liverpool has spent like 500 or 600 million. I think I read, like, net spend is obviously a lot lower, but like they still spent a lot. Whereas, and I know like obviously you have to adjust for inflation and like the market conditions being what they are now, but those squads back then, there wasn't such a I don't think there was such a big gap. Like maybe it's something that like we could look into, like from a deep dive perspective, where maybe we'll look at it from a percentage perspective. Like, as a percentage, how much did Man United spend on their squad compared to like a middle of the table squad? Like, I think Everton was, for instance, middle of the table back then. Well, so like, was it like 50% more? Was it 100% more? Was it 200% more? So I think that would probably be a little bit of a better indicator of how close those teams were, or how far apart those teams were compared to now. But like you for instance, you can't like disregard that, like, that Man United treble team. You can't disregard the Arsenal Invincibles either. That Chelsea team when Mourinho first came in, or even the Chelsea team when he came in for his second spell with Hazard as well. There were some great teams that I think could give either of these teams a run for their money.
Yeah, and thank you for the longest yes or no answer to a question. No, but you were leading into my point anyway, so you just took the words pretty much out of my mouth. But I would absolutely put the team who's going to finish second this year above a lot of former Premier League champions. I mean, without deep diving and just going off the top of my head, really the only standout champions that I would have from the 90s would be that United team in 99. And that's only because they were putting the cherry on top of winning a treble. Because I don't think their points tally was all that impressive back then. I think they lost a fair few games that season as well. So it's really just the narrative and the accomplishment to succeed in all three. When we talk about Fergie, I don't really think Fergie ever had a truly great team per se in terms of an individual season, or not true, not but to this level is what I'm saying. But he had the longevity, of course, and that in a lot of ways is more impressive to be able to do it over that span of time and assert that dominance for so long over English football. With what is sort of looking now like it was just force of will from that guy. So an incredible achievement. But if you look into his individual team season on season, the only other one apart from 99 that I would put in this realm was the 0809 winning team, where they capped off winning three in a row, and they fought off a really good challenge from Liverpool that season, which is, to your point, one of the few second place teams I can think of. But that's probably because I'm a Liverpool supporter as well. But that Liverpool team was really good. I think if you did a combined 11 of that Liverpool team versus this Liverpool team, it would be pretty close to see how many players would get in from each team. I mean, you had Steven Gerrard, Fernando Torres, Xabi Alonso, Javier Mascherano. Carragher was still at the back playing well, so that was a really solid team. But that's as far as I'd go for United teams. I mean, and in terms of Wenger teams, the only truly one at this level is obviously the Invincibles. But the sneaky thing with the Invincibles, I believe they drew 13 games that season, so their points tally isn't probably going to be as high as the second place team from this. But again, the whole narrative of going undefeated for a season is unbelievable. So you put that above. And speaking of narratives, another one you put above straight away is the Leicester title winning team, because 5,000 to 1 odds, I believe. Just what a fairy tale, what a story. It's incredible that they were able to win. I think Ancelotti had a good Chelsea title winning team in 09-10. I think they got to 100 goals. Didier Drogba was scorer for Fido, so playing that narrow diamond in midfield. That was a really good team. Conte's Chelsea team, I think they finished mid 90 points, like 94, 95. And then obviously the City Centurions, the next year's City team and next year's Liverpool team that finished second, I'd probably put both those teams above whoever finishes champions this season, to be quite honest, even though these teams are incredible. But yeah, I can't, off the top of my head, without deep dive, I can't think of many other teams, even as champions, who I'd put above the team that's going to finish second. So I just wanted to discuss that with you and put that into some sort of context. And just before I promise we will move away from Liverpool City, but this is really the only talking point from the weekend. But you touched on it, and I guess we'll do it now. But the rivalry, and a lot of the conversation about is this the best rivalry in Premier League history? And I get the arguments for and against, because I get the argument for in terms of we haven't seen the top two teams battling for every trophy in the country playing at this level. We haven't ever seen it before in the Premier League. I mean, we've touched on it in a previous pod. The only thing that comes to our mind from our time of intently watching football is Real Madrid Barcelona, when Guardiola and Mourinho were going at it. So in terms of the footballing quality, we haven't seen this. But in terms of, and I get the argument against, in terms of back in the day, I mean, these players had a fierce rivalry. I mean, it was for the era. They didn't want to talk to each other. It was it was kind of this mentality that football was still kind of everything. Whereas now we're seeing these players, and not like they were getting paid well back then, but now we're seeing them get paid and have have like celebrity status and stuff like this, so that they can get away from that football bubble a bit. But whereas even just 20 years ago, I think these players were still so into that football bubble that it meant that these rivalries maybe were more intense in terms of what you talk about, like the fighting. You know, obviously you go Arsenal, Man United, you go the tunnel incident, the Pizzagate. That's great fun. So I guess my question is, do you think we'll see rivalries like that again with what I've talked about in terms of how the modern game sort of can be perceived now?
I don't think you will, just because of social media. Now that there's more focus on these players, like there's cameras. Everyone has a camera now. Like every civilian has a camera in their pocket right now, so it's easy to snap someone.
Yeah. Tell Cristiano Ronaldo that.
Exactly, but like it's easy to just like take a picture of someone or take a video recording of someone and post it online within seconds, and there's no more of that privacy. So like players, even though back then they were seen as role models, yes, but now you can't put a toenail wrong in terms of saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. Like you cannot do it, because it will straight away be all over the internet and like be trending and all that stuff. So with that, because they're seen as role models and like there's an even bigger focus on them, they need to sort of spurt that whole respect narrative and culture and stuff like that. They need to actually say it, oh yeah, I respect them, or all this stuff. And whereas like back in the day, that didn't need that wasn't needed to be said. Like there was that mutual respect there. You didn't need to go and say it on national television or to their face or whatever. Like, yes, you're going to put in a crunching tackle on them during those 90 minutes, but after the 90 minutes was up, like, there was that respect there, but there wasn't that respect with that. There wasn't that. There was still that sort of hatred there, where you weren't going to go on, hug them after the game and all that stuff. Like, you were going to go off with your team into the dressing room, or go and clap your fans or whatever. Like, but there was no hugging with the opponent. Whereas I think I read something the other day where like De Bruyne said that because someone asked him about that tackle that Van Dyke put on him, and afterwards, after the tackle, I think they like sort of like embraced, or like they sort of patted each other on the shoulder, like, and he said something like, "Oh, both their kids go to the same school, so they see each other like every day of the week, pretty much." So like they that sort of indicates that they're sort of friends out, like in the real world and all that. But yeah, like that doesn't exist anymore. Like imagine Vieira and Keane, like seeing each other while they're picking up their kids after, like, from school or something. Like you cannot visualize that. So I don't think that those rivalries will exist. The closest that you saw was a couple of years ago with Mourinho Barca. That got dirty. Like that actually got like really really dirty. Like some of those tackles that they were putting in on Messi and stuff like that, like Pepe and Ramos that were putting in on him. I think Marcelo even put in a really bad tackle on him. But like that's the closest that I've seen in my time, like as like as an adult watching football, because obviously I was a little bit too young to remember the Keane Vieira one, watching that live, but so all I could watch is sort of like replays of it today, but and hear the stories. But yeah, like I don't think we'll see anything close to that anymore.
Yeah, and your last 2 points, I think, went into it, or you looped it back around pretty much to prelude what I wanted to say, which is when you look at that Real Madrid Barcelona rivalry, obviously you had an established rivalry already there. I mean, the Real Madrid Barcelona rivalry is maybe the most convoluted rivalry in world football, no doubt. In terms of the history of it and what it means in a political aspect, as well as a footballing aspect, as well as a cultural aspect. It's so multi-layered like that. So I think it will be interesting in the future because obviously Liverpool and City's rivalry is born out of the fact that these two teams are the best two teams in England for the last 5 years, and they've been going for the major trophies against each other. So it's a purely footballing rivalry, and I think that's why in this case you see the respect. And I'm not saying that you're wrong in terms of how we perceive footballers to act, because that definitely happens now. You want to be putting out the good message on social media, either for your brand or your celebrity, or just to look like a good role model, as you say. So, but in terms of this rivalry specifically, and I think it's exemplified by the managers Klopp and Guardiola just embracing each other and having friendly chats in front of the camera, it shows you that this rivalry is pure respect because these two teams play football at the level that they do, which means they run into each other nearly every season. So it'll be interesting in the future if we saw maybe a Man United get really good while either City was still good or Liverpool were good. Probably more so Liverpool, because you have more history in terms of that derby and that rivalry. It would be interesting to see if that might have an effect on it. But having said that, if you can contrast it to United Arsenal, I don't think the history of United Arsenal was that rich before Wenger anyway. I mean, obviously they're both big clubs in England, so you have that sort of rivalry. But in terms of the historical rivalry, it was probably more so than Liverpool City, but it wasn't one where you look at it and it wasn't a Man United Liverpool or it wasn't a Tottenham Arsenal, So that's probably the only little asterisk I'd put on that point. Where if you saw like in the Premier League, if you saw Liverpool and Man United be really good at the same time, would that have an impact just because they have that deeply ingrained culture of their club of hating the other? So that might be something to look for. But as we're going to touch on soon, we might have to be looking for a while. And with that being said, I think it's I can feel people screaming, "Can we talk about something else other than Liverpool City?" So let's move on and let's talk about Manchester United. And at this point, Manchester United fans are now screaming, "Can we talk about Liverpool and City again?" Because I mean, what a mess United are in. How can you? Oh, I mean, how can you lose to Everton at the moment? The way Everton are playing, that game was a lost game. It wasn't Everton coming out and doing anything special to win the game. That was just United, as they have been for a while now, just being able to turn in such an abject, poor display where they just, if you took that badge off them, you wouldn't be able to tell who they were. Absolutely no way. That's not Manchester United rolling into your stadium anymore. They don't strike any fear in anyone. They're pale, and they are really, really in a bad state at the moment. So I don't want to focus too much on what's going on off the pitch because I haven't delved enough into it to have the informed opinion of what goes on in the boardroom or anything like that. And I believe at the end of the day, when it comes to football, the actual product, the actual football that you put out on the pitch is the bread and butter. That's the thing. That's the foundation for everything that you want to do. If that's not there, then you've got no chance. If you're not winning, if you're not in the hunt for titles, if you're not achieving your footballing objectives, you've got nothing to build on. So any grand plans that they have in terms of the business side, the commercial side, anything like that. And I know United is still a massive club, but I mean, how long can they stay massive if they're going to be like this for the foreseeable future? It's really poor. So we've already touched on it, or I did a few pods ago, about the salaries at United and how ludicrous they are. And it just got me thinking that really, if you're Man United at this point in the summer, we don't believe they're going to finish top four, obviously now, especially after. In the summer, you have two options, and neither of them are very good, but one of them can work if you, like I say, get the right manager in. But the two options are you can keep these players who you believed in enough to pay over 500,000 for Cristiano Ronaldo, nearly 400, or it might be 400,000 for David De Gea, nearly 400,000 for Varane, nearly 400,000 for Sancho per week. So you can choose to keep these players and get the right manager in. Or door number two is you got to rebuild the whole club from the ground up, and and you can't do it all in one summer, but you've got to get rid of these high wages out of your squad. You've got to get rid of. I think I heard that Phil Jones is still making 150,000 there, and we talked about Juan Matas still getting 160,000. So you can't if you want a new ethos in the club, you can't have players getting paid that much money. You need to build from the ground up, and that means you're not going to attract the stars anymore. But I mean, how long can they attract the stars if they play like this anyway? And I don't know. So, and that would take a while because, as we've said, they have so many players on such high salaries that need to be gotten rid of. You can't do it in one window. It will probably take 3 or 4 windows just to level out the foundation so that you can build. So that's a really dire thought that it could be, if you go that direction, it could be another 2 seasons. But as I said, I think indoor one, you can keep these players, but how long can we believe in these players as it is? Because they can't absolve themselves from blame. I mean, I agree that I think if that's your direction and you're going to pay players that much money, you have to get a manager in who they respect, and they haven't done it. And I mean, if you just think off the top of your head, the managers who have been out of contract or out of work since Sir Alex Ferguson left the club, it's mind-boggling. I mean, you've got managers like Antonio Conte being out of contract a few times. You've got Pep Guardiola the same. I mean, he let his contract run out of Bayern, he let it run out of Barcelona. You couldn't attract him. And the kicker is, you couldn't attract Pep Guardiola to your club, but Man City could. Your closest neighbours who were nothing for so many years now can attract better coaches than you can and can attract better players than you can because the football they put out on the pitch is better than yours. So the managerial appointments don't link up with their philosophy in terms of what they pay players, which is just it just shows the mess they're in. So with those two doors, which in the summer, if you were in a position where you could control what Manchester United do, which door would you be taking?
I'm also going to throw out two other managers. You had
Oh yeah, there's more.
yeah, well, you had Ancelotti, who's been sort of going
Yep,
from team to team, and you had Allegri's been out of contract until he came back to
yep.
Juve.
Max Allegri. Yeah, they were the two.
He took like a year off. I think Poch was out of without a team for a while as well before he
Poch
went
was
to
out. Zidane is out at the moment,
Zidane's
out of
out.
contract.
Yep. So they definitely had their chances to go for a lot of these top managers, and then they're fumbling in all sorts of areas. But in terms of like what I would do or what they should do, I watched this that on Sky Sports, like this, I think it was like the Sunday Soccer podcast, whatever they call it, like this, they're just sort of like a group of guys, sort of like us, that talk about football, and they did like basically a clearinghouse, like who should stay and who should go. They pretty much nominated like about half the team. They need to clear half the team, like because they're just not good enough or they're getting paid too much. So they have more deadwood at that club than what Arsenal had prior to Arteta coming in and clearing out a lot of it. And I think there's still a handful of players that still need to be cleared out at Arsenal, but yeah, they have a massive reconstruction project on their hands, because I don't think that these players can deliver or can take them to where they need to be. they have a lot of players that are aging already. Like Cavani's already like 36, 37. Ronaldo's already 36, 37. Varane is already, I think he's 31, 32, I think. And he's very injury prone as well. You mentioned Phil Jones. He's apparently had like knee problems for like 3 or 4 years now. That's why he's been out of it. But yeah, he's still under contract there, and he's still picking up a fat check. Juan Mata makes 1 or 2 appearances a season, picking up a fat check. They just have a lot of these players that they don't fit, I guess, that the modern football system either. Like that, like football has, I guess, come like especially, and it's been spearheaded by City and Liverpool, where they like that sort of pressing system and pressing and possession based, and Man United can't press or keep possession. They just don't have the players for it, and they don't have the mentality for it. So yeah, they need to bring in a manager who they're going to keep for the better part of 5 to 10 years, to be honest. Who knows how to build not just a squad, but also rebuild, I guess, the system around the club. And they need it. They can't get rid of him after the first year or two if it's not going right, because you can make that argument for Klopp at Liverpool. Like the first 2 years, he had a lot of dead wood to get rid of. But if Liverpool, especially after that first year, if they got rid of him after that first year, just because first year it's not working out, you guys wouldn't be where you are right now. So and another example is Moyes at West Ham. Like he's rebuilt them into a top 4 contender because he's given time to do what he does best, and had.
Hey, just quickly though, let's not forget that David Moyes was relieved of his. I don't know if he's relieved, but he did leave West Ham once already, and he came back. So
yeah, and but he was only given 9. He was only given 9 months at United, wasn't he? So
he didn't last the season.
And he was given an aging squad, like a squad that was
definitely
on their way out. And I don't know how Sir Alex won that title with them in his final year, but he manages. It was almost like he squeezed that last little bit of juice out of those players before you sort of through that, like, that skin in the bin. Like if you're thinking of squeezing out lemon, yeah. Like so, they have a massive task on their hands.
Yeah, you know what? Fergie being able, it sort of reminds me of like the Cleveland Cavaliers at the 2000s when they wouldn't be without LeBron James. It's like one season with LeBron James, 60 plus wins. The next season they're bottom of the Eastern Conference. It was just like Fergie did that with that team, and then as soon as he's gone, that team is nothing. And you saw that, yes, they were aging, but also he was getting performances out of players like Darren Fletcher and Darren Gibson at times. Danny Welbeck looked like a Welbeck. That title-winning season in 08-09, they can put a lot of that on the shoulders of Federico Marcheda. Who's even heard of him since then? But Fergie got him to come in and score crucial goals in the run-in of that title race. I mean, Fergie was the master of getting everything out of the players that he had, because those players, as you saw, without him, were not much. But I guess I could offer maybe a ray of hope for United supporters where there's this in-between option, because by the sounds of it, it sounds like you want to start the rebuild now and go with that long-term manager who's going to see us through the next 5 years, and we have to get rid of players and then start building from there. I think, because I thought this going into the season, to be fair, I think that squad is a good squad of players. I mean, they're names at the moment because they're not playing well, but still, like, they had to play football well at some point to get the names that they got. So I think if there's a ray of hope that if you can get the right manager who can get a reaction out of all these world-class players who are world-class players on paper, and some of them are still world-class players for their countries when they go away and play for them. If you could get a tune out of them with the right manager, then I don't necessarily think you need to go that 5-year replacement like Liverpool did with Brendan Rodgers or someone like that. I think you could still get a world-class manager to work with these players. I think the window is lessening because, as you say, they're getting older. So I think next season might be about the last season you could get away with doing it. But if you can get a manager who can get through to these players and importantly get a system with just the footballing side that they can play and feel comfortable in it, even if it's a 5-3-2. We don't need to hear all this crap about United have to be on the front foot and they have to play this open attacking football all the time. No, United need to win games. They need to win games and be in contention for trophies, however that happens. So at this point, if I was a United fan, even if they were talking about Diego Simeone coming in, I'd be like, yes, please. That guy knows how to win games. He knows how to put out a product that you can identify with. I don't care if it's not open attacking football, because if we try and play open attacking football, we get killed every week. So what's the point? Let's try and win. So they should probably in the summer still try and get the top manager who they can get in for this group of players and have one more go at it this season. But it needs to be a top manager. We're not talking about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's anymore. We're not talking about Ralph Rangnick's anymore. We need to go out and get the Zidane who's been sitting there for. We need to get a player who's won things with top players, because our whole model in terms of who we recruit and which players we get in has been let's pay them a lot because they're top players. And then if you can do that and have success next season, you've bought yourself another season, and then you might be in the Champions League where you can attract better players. So I just think at the end of it, this rebuild idea is how long are you going to rebuild? Because if you lessen yourself to rebuild yourself back up, the other teams who are already up there are getting better. So I think Tottenham can get better in the summer with Conte, especially if they finish top four. Conte stays, he's happier. He can attract players just because he's Antonio Conte. He can make sure that the likes of Harry Kane and Son Heung-min stay, which is as important as attracting new players. So I think they could get better. And there's no doubt for me that Liverpool and City will get better, because I feel like most players in the world look at those two teams and they're like, yeah, I wouldn't mind playing there. So I just think United should be looking at winning games. I think this arrogance about how football should be played is just absolute bullshit for me. Win games, take care of that first, and then you can worry. If you're winning things, then you can worry about how you play. But try and win things first. I mean, it's just a joke to me that can be the mentality. But for me, I guess if that's the little ray of hope that I could offer for Man United, maybe they can get a top manager in, and then maybe they can finish top four again next season and attract better players. Because, the other option is start your rebuild, which is going to take 2 years just to clear dead wood. I mean, that's not going to be pretty for a club of United size.
Well, apparently the rumour is that they've offered Ten Hag the job, but that means that they're going down the rebuild route. However, there's another rumour flying around that Ten Hag has set a bunch of demands in place, and unless they're met, he isn't coming. And I'm guessing it's to do with control, because he's most likely heard from he works closely with Edwin van der Sar at Ajax. I'm sure that Van der Sar has his contacts still at United, so he knows what's going on. Ten Hag worked with Van der Beek as well. I'm sure he has a close relationship with him. I'm sure he's sent him a text saying, "Hey, how are things at United? What's going on?" So I think he has a bit of inside knowledge into how bad things are there. But yeah, United are gonna have to give up a lot of control to him if that's all true, and they could even miss out on getting him, and I think he was even like a disciple under Pep at I think he was like the under 21s coach at Bayern, so he worked closely with Pep. So they could potentially miss out on one of the up and coming managers. I think he's already like in his 40s, but like they could potentially miss out on one of the better managers going around in football if they're unwilling to meet what I'd say are reasonable demands. They're probably things that Sir Alex had control over, but they're just not willing to give it to the Mourinhos, to the Ten Hags, and that's why Mourinho left ultimately, because he didn't have enough control. But yeah, I think they're going to go down the rebuilding route instead of this throwing money at the problem route, because I think they spent $500 million more than Man City, and they've won. They've only won like Europa League, and you're going back to Mourinho's coaching back then. Was it an FA Cup as well? Europa League and FA Cup that they won?
I believe so.
Yeah. So yeah, they've spent more than City as well, which is unbelievable to think about. So
yeah, that's a real.
It's concerning. Yeah, it's
yeah, definitely.
But the other thing is, if they're going down this rebuild route, Arsenal already have a season ahead of them in terms of rebuilding and clearing out dead wood as well, and they still have a handful of players to get rid of. But look at what they did. They got rid of pretty much the last bit of dead wood now in January, and now they're left short for this remaining part of the season. So United need to. They're going to be going through similar troubles, I think. However, I do think that there are bigger household names, so they can still attract better players than Arsenal.
Yeah, and you've just stolen my segue, which is perfect. So watch this space for Man United. What's happening in the summer, because they got nothing left to look forward to this season. But I guess the question, because I noticed this watching Arsenal against Brighton, and I couldn't believe my ears. Honestly, I couldn't. But there were moments in that game, and I get fans being edgy and disgruntled when the team's not playing well. I get that. But to actually hear audible boos for Arsenal during that game, I thought, well, it just showed me, and I know it's a generalization because I have a lot of. Obviously, you're a good friend and you're an Arsenal supporter, but these Arsenal fans who rock up to the Emirates, sometimes their lack of loyalty is disgraceful. Sometimes this Arsenal team has actually so far done enough, I feel, to be proud of that team. And I know things have turned against them in recent weeks, but to actually audibly hear boos ring around the stadium, I just thought was so poor. So the question that I wanted to ask is, if we see this season playing out how we both expect it to, and Tottenham finish top four, how long is Arteta being given next season? How much leeway is he being given by the fans to go and chase top four again?
I think he has, from what I've seen, like with interviews with is it Josh Kroenke, and with other, like, I guess, higher ups. I think Edu as well did a couple of interviews. They know that it's going to be a process, and it seems like they don't really, at this point in time, they don't really care about those disgruntled Arsenal fans, because they just won the Super Bowl. Was it the LA Rams? They just won it after like going through like a sort of like rebuilding process and like this sort of methodical approach to recruiting players and stuff like that. And it looks like they want to sort of bring that model into Arsenal as well. And I never thought top four was a reality this season. I wanted to see Europa League as a minimum, so that's finishing sixth. And considering we finished eighth last season, we still had Deadwood to clear out. That was, I think, the minimum expectations. I think that they've exceeded expectations, and they've shown in games that they've shown that they can patch together a consistent run of games, but then they have that drop that lasts longer than what top teams have a drop for. Like, if Man City or Liverpool have one bad game, the next week they're immediately back on it. They're immediately picking back points back up. Whereas if Arsenal have one bad game, it transitions into 2, 3, 4 bad games generally. So they still haven't gotten that experience of bouncing back immediately like the top teams, but they've shown that they can play good football in moments and look threatening towards the top teams. Like that Man City, we should have at least, at the very minimum, gotten a draw out of Man City, if not a won that back in January. I thought we were very unfortunate to lose there. Against Liverpool in the first half 2-3 weeks ago, I thought that we were slightly the better team, but then the second half we just collapsed. And we've shown in those games that we're on the right path. So I think next season, I think we give him another full season. I don't necessarily like seeing managers being fired in the middle of the season, unless you're fighting relegation. Then that's a different sort of ball game. But I can't see Arteta and this Arsenal team fighting relegation next season. So if they're, for instance, struggling in the middle of the table, I still wouldn't get rid of him in the middle of the season. I'd wait till the end of the season and have a fresh coach in for pre-season to implement their style and their philosophy at the start of the season rather than in the middle of the season. So I'd give him all of next season to get that top 4 spot.
Yeah, and I agree with that last point as well. I think if you're gonna do the rebuild and you're a big club who really shouldn't be battling relegation or really at any point of the season, even if you know that you're not going to keep him over the summer, I think you keep him around, or you probably get that into. It just depends who's on the market, really. So, for example, you look back at when Liverpool got Klopp, and I thought Brendan Rodgers would get sacked in the summer before, but they actually kept him around because Klopp had only just. And I have an inkling, but obviously I haven't nothing to back it up. But I have an inkling that maybe FSG spoke to Klopp as soon as he quit Dortmund and said, like, do you want to manage Liverpool? And I have a feeling the Klopp said he wanted to take some time off. But as soon as he was ready, he could come in. And then Rodgers was gone very promptly and Klopp was brought in very quickly. So that's kind of where I get that inkling from, that FSG always lined up Klopp and Rodgers was really just holding the place until it was time to bring him in. So I agree with that point. But I don't necessarily agree that Arsenal have overachieved this season or gone above expectations, because for me, if I was an Arsenal fan, and it's good because going back to Klopp, we have the arc that a top manager should be following if he is indeed a top manager. So Klopp, and we've done this in a previous pod, but obviously first full season, Klopp is taking Liverpool top 4. So that's what a top manager does. As soon as he gets a full preseason and he can have a transfer window or two, he can get his team into the top 4. And that's what Klopp did with Liverpool. So but to be fair, at that time, my expectation for Klopp was just challenge for top 4. Go into the last 5 games of the season, 6 games of the season, and we're in with a good shout for top 4. Even if we miss out, that's fine. You've achieved what I would have expected you to achieve. He overdid it, and then he kept overdoing it for the seasons past. My problem with Arteta is and COVID, yes, does play into it. So he's had a disrupted one. This is his first really full season. So if he gets him into top 4, no doubt he's overachieved. But what I would have put the same expectations on Arteta as I did a Klopp at first full season. Even if we're only saying this is his first full season, even though he had all of last season as well. But let's be lenient and say this is his first full season. He needs to be challenging for top 4. And I feel like, obviously, up until this point, he has. Hopefully, they don't fall away too badly after these back-to-back losses. But the lack of depth in the squad is a big issue, and I think that's what this little blip, or this second game of the blip, can be attributed to. Obviously, Palace just outplayed him, and sometimes that happens. But he needs to maintain the challenge. And then as an Arsenal supporter, I'd be happy with that. But then next season, he must finish top 4. He must finish top 4 because that's too long. If he doesn't finish top 4 next season, then I would agree. Well, I'd agree with the disgruntlement of the Arsenal fans and wanting him out, because I think he's not on the arc of a top manager if he does that. and you need to get on that arc. And they've cleared out the deadwood now, and next season he needs to build what he wants to build and finish in the top four for me. So, I mean, I'm not exactly comparing him to Klopp. I'm not asking him to do what Klopp did, but I'm just putting the same expectations I had of Klopp when at the start of his Liverpool career as I would on Arteta. And I'm even being a little lenient for the COVID. So, but I just thought it was interesting because I've always seen Arsenal fans as a bit fickle. Not all of them, obviously. I've said that before, but just the whole demeanor around the club is very fickle. When they start losing, it's only back to back losses. I mean, it's not great, obviously, but like you said, did you expect to finish top four this season? No way. Going into the season, it had to be City, Liverpool, Chelsea, United, and United have fallen off at Tottenham. But even then, I would have put Tottenham above Arsenal as well. So I just thought it was too quick to turn. But in terms of the expectations, he must maintain the challenge for the rest of this season, and for me, he must finish top four next season.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like, I think we're both in agreement on that. So this season, challenge for top four, which I think they have challenged. Whether they get there or not, that's a different matter. But next season, hopefully, be in Europa League at a minimum. Get some more players in so we can increase the squad size, because we're really lacking in the squad. I think we have a very good starting 11, like the makings of a top 3 starting 11, because they've shown their moments that they can compete with City and Liverpool. Obviously not for the full 90 minutes, but they can compete and they can pose troubles. But after that starting 11, who do you bring in? Who do you bring off on the bench? Like, when you look at who City bring on as subs, or who Liverpool bring on as subs, it's night and day. Like, so, once we get injuries, which now like we have with Tierney and Partey out, there's no one to bring in, and that starting 11 just drops off from being like an 8 out of 10 to a 5 or 6 out of 10 in terms of, not just in terms of experience, but also like their knowledge of how to play and their desire and everything. Like, so that's going to be the difference maker, like what people they can bring in over summer and over the winter transfer period as well, which I think might be a little bit hard this year considering there's a World Cup. So it might be hard to sign players in January. But yeah, like, I think that overall they're definitely on the right path, but they definitely need to bring in now. They need to bring in like 5 or 6 players instead of just 1 or 2, considering how many players they got rid of in January.
Yeah, and just before we take it from North London to West London and touch on Chelsea, I just wanted to hit on one more point before we do that, and that's the context of finishing in the top 4 is very important. So, obviously, if Arteta is able to maintain this challenge this season, finishing Europa League spots at a minimum, then the context of them finishing top 4 while they still had to play Europa League football, if they were able to accomplish that, I think that puts the accomplishment into an even greater context, because the example I'm thinking of in my head is Brendan Rodgers in that title challenge with Suarez. I thought that was probably a little bit misleading because they had no European football that season. And to be fair, Klopp didn't have European football in his first season where they finished top 4. But obviously he's gone on and proven himself anyway. But Rodgers never had that European football that they had to contend with, and then they ended up challenging for the title. Obviously, it's a huge blow to lose Suarez in that transfer window. But then the next season, Liverpool were a shadow of themselves. They had a little good patch in the middle where they started playing a 3-4-3, and he turned it around a little bit, but then they fell away at the end, and I believe they finished 6th or something that season. So I just wanted to point out that if he can get them into top four with Europa League football next season, that would be a great accomplishment. And I think it would definitely show that he's the right man to take them forward, at least for the next few years after that. So, yeah, that was just something I wanted to hit on. But going across, because I don't really want to talk about the game. I didn't really see the game. Obviously, I saw the goals, but Chelsea were able to get a bit of their mojo back. Surprise, surprise, against Southampton, who have endured some of the worst defeats in Premier League history, and it's a weird thing that this Ralph Hasenhüttl team does sometimes, because from all accounts, this game could have been in the double figures itself, although Chelsea just kept it at six. Side note, I was scrolling through Facebook, and Gimme Sport have all those crappy clickbait headlines, and it was one about a Chelsea fan who'd made a thread about how much Mason Mount touches his hair during games. So when I was watching the goal rush and I see Mason Mount score a goal and then he's wheeling away in celebration, he's got the shaved head. So I just wanted to say that if you don't think footballers read about what's being said about them, then think again, because I reckon he definitely saw that headline and he decided to make a statement by shaving his head. But I just thought that was an interesting little point there. But with Chelsea winning 6-0 and somewhat getting their mojo back against Southampton, do you think this moves the needle for them as they go into their second leg tie against Real Madrid later tonight for you, tomorrow morning for me?
Oh man, yeah, it definitely threw a spanner in the works with that, because I think on the last podcast we spoke about whether Tuchel can turn it around in a week, and if we're talking purely based on results, like a 3-1 deficit isn't it's not the biggest deficit to turn around. Like we've seen teams in the past, in recent past, and in like over the history of the Champions League, turn around 3-0 results, 4-0 results, um, 5-0 results, and stuff like that over two legs. So it's definitely
I don't know if we've
possible.
seen.
I think, or maybe not 5-0, but didn't PSG have a 5 goal lead, or was it
Yeah, maybe
four?
Barca had to. Yeah, they had to get to 7, didn't they? But that was
Yeah,
during the match. But still,
but
yeah.
look,
No, I get your point.
but yeah, like there's we've obviously seen results be turned around over the past.
Yeah.
Now, as good as a 6-0 result is, Southampton seem to have hit a really poor slump of form at the moment. They like around that City result from a couple of weeks back. They were picking up results and they looked like they were flying. And now in recent weeks who did they have last week? They drew 1-1 to Leeds. They lost 2-1 to Watford, who were relegation battlers. They lost
They
2-1 to
seem comfortable.
they
They're not
they
playing for anything.
yeah, they lost 2-1 to Newcastle. Um, they lost 4-0 to Aston Villa. So that's like four losses in a row that I've now
Yeah.
said. And then they won 2-0 against Norwich. That was on Feb 25th. So they've lost like every game since then, if I'm not mistaken. So they weren't necessarily going into this game flying high, but neither were Chelsea, to be fair. But Chelsea have a much superior squad. So it's difficult to tell. Like I still expect Real Madrid to get the job done, but I wouldn't be surprised if Chelsea still managed to get a result.
And if
Yeah.
you hadn't seen this 6-0 win, you would have been surprised if Chelsea got the result?
Yes. Yeah. I think even if it was a standard like 2-0 or
Yeah.
3-0, I still wouldn't be surprised. But the result I think, like, look, I didn't watch the game, and you mentioned that it could have been double figures, but I think looking on paper, if you go based on their loss to Brentford and also their loss to Real Madrid, this result might sort of paper over the cracks that are within that team. So I still I still don't have complete faith in them to go through. Like, I still wouldn't put them as favorites, even with such a big result.
Oh, I definitely wouldn't put them as favourites either. And the beauty of it is, you say, did this just paper over the cracks? Well, we get to find out later today for you, tomorrow for us. So that's good. That's the beauty of what's happening here. But I agree with pretty much everything you said. I think if I hadn't seen them get their goal scoring touch back and win this game so convincingly 6-0, then I probably would have said they have maybe a 5% chance to go through on the tie, because at the end of the day, it's still Chelsea. I'll give them a chance because they still are the reigning European champions. But after seeing this, I think it does move the needle. It doesn't move them into their favour, but it gives them, I think, for me, more of a percentage chance, because what was important for me as well was just seeing Timo Werner score. I believe it was 2 goals, and the first one looked like Timo Werner at Leipzig. It looked like a player who was worth 60 million, because he's rapid, quick, he's direct, he gets in behind, and then he finishes when he gets into that chance, which we haven't seen at all at Chelsea. He looks like a shell of himself. Because I actually thought that was a good signing when he came over, but boy, has that one not worked out. But if they're going to play him over Lukaku, and I think they need a striker in this game, you can't. Although Havertz has been good in recent months, you can't, in a game where you need goals. You've got to be playing at least one striker, surely. So if it is in fact Timo Werner, then maybe it's just that little boost of confidence he gets from this actually hitting the back of the net might just give him enough confidence to throw a spanner in the works of the Bernabeu, because I think we all believe Real Madrid with a 3-1 lead going back home, it should be enough for him. But I mean, I'm not quite ready to write off Chelsea. They are. How do they defend their title? That will be the interesting thing to see. And just seeing this little boost, I think, just makes things a little bit more interesting. So yeah, I think we're in agreement on that one. Was there any other Champions League tie that you wanted to touch on? Anything interesting? Because
I did.
maybe Bayern via. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I did see, and like that was the one that I wanted to talk about. I saw someone put up I guess a memory or a stat of a memory. I think Basel beat Bayern 1-0 at Basel. I think it was in that 3 or 4 years ago. I think when they
I know
won.
what game you're talking about, because
Yeah, and
you know what happened in the second leg,
they
and
won
it's in my
7-0.
deep dive last week. Mario Gomez scores 4 goals and they win 7-0.
Yeah, so I'm not sure whether Villarreal can expect the same sort of drubbing, but I can expect that Bayern are going to come with absolute ferocity at them, because this might have, if this is, I know it's not the same Bayern, but like Bayern as a club have that same sort of mentality where, especially at home, if they feel insulted, they're going to come at you like with all force and just absolutely destroy you. They have that within their sort of club ethos. And I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being like a 3-0, 4-0, 5-0, to be honest. As well as Villarreal, as well as Emery has Villarreal playing. Like that sort of big result would not surprise me, especially Bayern being at home.
Yeah, I think I don't. I think I will be surprised if they get beaten 5+. 4 is about the cutoff. 5, because this Villarreal team isn't that Basel team. This Villarreal team are reigning Europa League champions, so they know what it is to play knockout stage European football, and they know how to be resilient, and they know what it takes in the later stages. While not quite at this level, obviously Europa League isn't this level, but So I think they're organised and disciplined enough to not get rolled quite that badly, but they still could get rolled or three or four. But yeah, I think this Villarreal team is quite good. They're quite organised. It's what you'd expect Unai Emery team to do. And it would be very interesting if they were to maybe shock Bayern and take a lead over there, because then there'll be some very sweaty palms. And Bayern will have it all on. And it's football. I mean, anything can happen, a slip or a set piece that you give away stupidly and they score. So that would be fascinating to see, because we sit here and we think that some things are foregone conclusions, but when you play the game on the turf, anything can happen. Honestly, anything can happen, especially when you're in the last eight of the Champions League. I'm still not putting Liverpool through to the next stage of the competition. Although I think being at home, second leg, 3-1 lead against Benfica, it's 97, 98, 99% maybe through. But there's always that 1%. And Liverpool play so open that if Benfica just get red hot, maybe score 2 goals in the first 30 minutes, then, the tie's level again? Wow, let's play from here. So I would be a bit surprised if they get rolled that heavily, but I do expect Bayern to get through to the next round. I don't think there's anything to talk about in Man City Atletico. I think we sort of know what to expect. We just don't know who's going to go through that, to be quite honest. I do think that one goal at the Etihad was so important for City. It was for both teams. And that's why I was disappointed that Simeone didn't double down and just do everything to avoid conceding that goal, because if you bring it back to the wonder and all you've got to do is win the game, whether it be in extra time or on penalties, all you've got to do is win it somehow. But now they have to make up a goal deficit. So at some point they have to come out, whether that be from the start of the match or, as many are predicting, as you predicted, leaving it to the last 10 minutes. We'll wait and find out. But we know whatever they do in approaching the game will be done with caution, and we know the way City play. So, yeah, and we've already touched on Chelsea, Real. I don't know if you had any other points from City Atletico or Liverpool Benfica, but for me, let's roll it out. Let's see what happens.
No, I don't really have anything to add. Like, we did sort of touch on Atletico Man City, and you mentioned it, where I think everyone is in agreement that it's going to be the same type of game for about 80 minutes. Atletico is going to sit back with 10 men behind the ball, try play on the counter, and finally open up in the final 10 or 5 minutes if it's still 1-0 overall on aggregate, or even if City manage to get a goal, they're going to come. Atletico will have to come out a lot earlier, especially if City can get that goal in the first half. Atletico are going to come out in the second half already playing a lot more open, and that's, I guess, when the game becomes a little bit more exciting for the neutral. Benfica Liverpool. I think Benfica have now given. You can say this for the other ties as well. I think Man City have given, I guess, a little bit of a blueprint onto how to sort of expose Liverpool, in terms of how to press them and sort of bring that intensity to the game. We'll see if Benfica can do that. They probably might come out like that in the first 10-15 minutes, try and shock Liverpool, especially at Anfield. But I don't think they'll be able to sustain it for the entire 90. And I expect Liverpool to go through. Not sure how comfortable it will be, but I think it will be a little bit of a battle, because Benfica seem to have that in their sort of DNA, where they will try and battle you until the final whistle.
Yeah, I agree. I think that point you made about sustaining it is spot on, as well, as we talked about in the review of that game. How it's hard for, unless you're Manchester City or Bayern Munich or Chelsea, to sustain the challenge that Liverpool bring you for the whole 90 minutes. You've got to match their energy levels. So obviously, in the first time we saw Benfica do it for that 20-25 minutes in the second half, but Liverpool were too good in the end and got that goal late on, which made it more comfortable than just 2-1. 2-1 to 3-1 is a big jump, but yeah, I think we see these ties the same. And I think on that note, we've got nothing to do but watch these games and hopefully have some really interesting and fun things to talk about once we've seen them, going into, reviewing them and then going into next weekend's fixtures around the leagues in Europe. So, Nev, I think at this point it's time to bid you adieu and say thank you. It's been a pleasure having you on the pod, and we'll speak again soon, no doubt.
Can't wait to do it again.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening. See you later.